People on TikTok and Reddit showed a way to actually unredact one of the Epstein files, so we decided to take a look and see for ourselves. This is the Justice Department's new Epstein library, where they've been posting tens of thousands of documents in the past week. If you scroll around the site, you can get to this page, which contains the botched redaction. It's from a lawsuit filed in 2020 by the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands against Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So this is the key paragraph, and it references Darren Indyke, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime attorney. Only problem? It's redacted. We can't see it. But if you select the whole paragraph, copy and paste into a Word document, you can actually see what was underneath those redactions.
Okay, stop. Just stop for a second. You're watching this clip and your brain is probably doing that thing where it's trying to process what you just saw. Because what you just saw is someone on the internet, someone with no special access, no security clearance, no government authority, taking what's supposed to be a redacted government document, a document about Jeffrey Epstein, about victims, about alleged co-conspirators, and they're just highlighting it, copying it, pasting it into a new document, and boom, there it is, all the classified information, just sitting there. That actually happened. That's real. The Department of Justice, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world, released thousands of pages of documents about one of the most sensitive criminal investigations in modern American history, and they redacted them like a college freshman who just discovered the highlighter tool in Microsoft Word. This isn't a joke. This isn't hyperbole. This is what your government actually did. And we need to talk about why. So you're scrolling through your feed today, right? And you see this headline, Epstein Files released. And depending on who you are, you either think, finally, transparency, justice, accountability, or you think, this is going to be another letdown, another heavily redacted document drop that raises more questions than answers. And here's the thing, you're both right. Because what the DOJ released last week is somehow both a historic moment of transparency and an absolute masterclass in institutional incompetence. Or maybe not incompetence, maybe something worse. We're going to figure that out together. Now, before we dive in, let's talk about how you probably heard about this story. Cable news gave you the 2-minute version. TikTok gave you the 30-second version. Twitter gave you the most unhinged takes imaginable. And none of them gave you the full picture, because the full picture takes time to explain, and time doesn't drive engagement metrics. This is why I do what I do. This is why this channel exists. Because someone needs to actually sit down and explain what's happening, not just what people are saying is happening. If you want to stay informed on stories like this as they develop, I send out a weekly newsletter breaking down the week's most important political developments. Links in the description. It's free, it's independent, and it's the only way I can reach you directly without an algorithm deciding what you see. Now, let's get into this. The headline that went viral was something like, DOJ drops Epstein bombshell, hundreds of thousands of pages released. And on one level, that's accurate. The DOJ did release a massive trove of documents, but the way that headline landed on people, the emotional resonance it carried, was all about revelation, about finally seeing what's been hidden, about accountability. And that's not exactly what happened. What actually happened is that Congress passed a law called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It passed almost unanimously. Republicans and Democrats both voted for it. Trump signed it in November. And it mandated that the Department of Justice release all Epstein-related files by December 19th. All of them, with very limited exceptions for redactions to protect victims and classified information. So when the DOJ started releasing files on Friday the 19th, people were expecting transparency. What they got was thousands of pages where entire sections are just black boxes, where 119 pages of grand jury testimony are completely blank, where photographs have every woman's face blacked out, where financial documents, the kind of records that would show who was paying who was enabling Epstein's operation, are just missing entirely. But here's why the headline still resonates. Because even with all of that, even with the redactions and the missing pages, what did get released is damning. Not necessarily in terms of new revelations about famous people, but in terms of what it shows about how the system protected Epstein for decades. And that's the real story. not who was on the plane. The real story is how this was allowed to continue for so long, by so many people, in so many institutions. Let me walk you through what actually happened step by step so you understand the full scope of this. Friday, December 19th, just before midnight, almost like they were trying to bury it in the holiday news cycle, the DOJ launches this website called the Epstein Library. That's what they're actually calling it. The Epstein Library. Like he's fucking Thomas Jefferson or something. But whatever. They upload tens of thousands of documents, FBI investigative records, grand jury materials, photographs, emails, subpoenas. Some of these documents are decades old, and the way it's organized is, it's not organized. There's no categorization, no timeline, no explanation of what you're looking at. It's just a massive data dump of PDFs with alphanumeric file names, and if you want to find something specific, good luck. Now the law required them to redact certain information, victims' names, minors' names, genuinely sensitive intelligence material. That makes sense. Nobody's arguing against protecting victims. But what people quickly realized is that the redactions were wildly inconsistent. Some documents would protect a victim's identity. Others would leave it completely visible. Some documents would redact one person's name in one place, then leave it unredacted 50 pages later. And most importantly, the technical execution of the redactions was catastrophically bad. This is where we get to the Reddit moment. Users on Reddit and TikTok discovered that if you open one of these PDFs, highlight the blacked out text, copy it, and paste it into a new document, the text is still there. It was never actually removed. They just put a visual layer over it. It's like putting a post-it note over a sentence and thinking nobody can lift the post-it note. According to CNN's reporting, this botched redaction technique can be traced back to a 2020 civil lawsuit in the Virgin Islands. So these aren't even new documents. The DOJ took documents from an old civil case, re-uploaded them to their new website, and didn't bother to check if the redactions actually worked. What was under those failed redactions? Allegations that Epstein's longtime attorney, Darren Indyke, signed hundreds of thousands of dollars in checks from Epstein's charitable foundation to young women. Allegations about hush money payments to victims. Information about co-conspirators. This is the stuff they didn't want you to see. Now, Indyke's lawyers have denied these allegations. The Virgin Islands settled their case for $105 million. So this isn't like we're revealing new bombshells that lead to criminal charges. But here's the question. If these allegations are false, if they're resolved, if the case is settled, why redact them at all? They were already in public court filings. Why did the DOJ feel the need to hide them? And that question becomes even more pressing when you see what else they did. Because while the DOJ was botching the redaction of information about Epstein's associates, they were simultaneously failing to protect actual victims. According to a statement from 19 Epstein survivors reported by ABC News, the DOJ violated the law by failing to redact multiple victims' identities, their names, their case information, identifying details, all left visible in the public files. Let me say that again. The DOJ protected information about possible co-conspirators with fake redactions that didn't work, while simultaneously exposing actual victims by leaving their information completely unprotected. This isn't incompetence. Or if it is incompetence, it's so selective and so patterned that it starts to look like something else. Here's the thing. This isn't about one document release. This isn't about one botched redaction. This is a pattern. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Let's go through this chronologically. Jeffrey Epstein was first investigated by the FBI in 1996. We know this now because of documents that were just released. A woman named Maria Farmer filed a complaint with the FBI in September 1996. She alleged that Epstein possessed and distributed material. That's 1996, 23 years before Epstein was finally prosecuted. What happened to that complaint? According to the documents, nothing. The FBI sat on it. Now, Congressman Robert Garcia has formally requested that the DOJ Inspector General investigate why the FBI failed to act on that complaint in the 1990s. Fast forward to 2008. Epstein gets prosecuted in Florida. But instead of federal charges, he gets a sweetheart deal negotiated by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta. 13 months in county jail, where he was allowed to leave during the day for work, and immunity for any potential co-conspirators. That immunity deal is why Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't charged until 2020, over a decade later. Fast forward to 2019. Epstein is finally arrested on federal charges, but he dies in jail under suspicious circumstances before he can stand trial. The official ruling is suicide. The cameras outside his cell malfunctioned. His cellmate was removed. The guards were asleep. An absolutely astonishing series of failures that just happened to occur at the exact moment when the most high-profile accused sex trafficker in the country could have started naming names. And now, in 2025, when Congress finally passes a law demanding full transparency, what do we get? Thousands of pages that are so heavily redacted they're almost useless. Missing financial documents that would show who funded Epstein's operation. Grand jury materials that are completely blacked out even though a federal judge approved their release. And technical redactions so incompetent that regular people can undo them in 5 seconds. At every single inflection point in this case, the system has protected someone. In 1996, the FBI protected someone by not investigating. In 2008, federal prosecutors protected co-conspirators by granting immunity. In 2019, the Bureau of Prisons protected someone by allowing Epstein to die. And in 2025, the DOJ is protecting someone through selective redactions and strategic incompetence. This isn't a series of unrelated failures. This is a pattern of institutional protection. But here's why this moment feels different than all the other moments when the Epstein story flared up and then died down. First, there's actual legal authority behind this release. This isn't a leaked document. This isn't a FOIA request that gets denied. This is a law passed by Congress, signed by the President. The DOJ is legally required to release these files. They can stall, they can redact, they can release them in the middle of the night during Christmas week, but they can't not release them. Second, the technical failure of the redactions means that information is now public that was never supposed to be public. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. People have downloaded these files. They've archived them. They've extracted the text. Whatever the DOJ was trying to hide, it's out there now. Third, the survivors are speaking out in a way they haven't before. Usually when the government releases documents related to Epstein, survivors have to be careful about their public statements because ongoing legal proceedings. But now, with the case technically closed, with Maxwell in prison and Epstein dead, survivors are publicly calling out the DOJ for violating the law. They're organized, they have lawyers, and they're not backing down. And fourth, this is all happening under an administration that explicitly promised transparency on this issue. Trump campaigned on releasing the Epstein Files. He signed the Transparency Act. His attorney general went on TV and said they're leading the most transparent administration in American history. And then they promptly missed the deadline, released heavily redacted documents, and protected information about powerful people while exposing victims. That contradiction creates political pressure that didn't exist before. Now let's be honest about what's likely to happen next. Nobody's going to jail from this. The people who enabled Epstein, who facilitated his crimes, who protected him within the government, they're not going to face criminal charges. That's just the reality. The statute of limitations has run on most of this. The DOJ has already said they found no evidence to charge any additional people. Maxwell is in prison. Epstein is dead. That's where the criminal accountability ends. The missing financial documents probably aren't missing by accident. Those records would show who funded Epstein's operation, who benefited from his network, who was on the payroll. If those documents haven't been released by now, they're not going to be released. And the more than 1 million additional documents the DOJ says they just discovered, they announced that on Christmas Eve. Classic holiday news dump. They said it'll take a few more weeks to release them. Translation, expect more of the same. Heavily redacted PDFs that raise more questions than they answer, released on a Friday night, organized in a way that makes them almost impossible to search. This isn't going to be a Hollywood ending where justice prevails and everyone gets held accountable. That's not how this works, but documentation matters. Precedent matters. Public pressure matters. Every time information comes out, even redacted information, it creates a record. It creates questions that have to be answered. It creates political pressure on future administrations. The reason we know about the 1996 FBI complaint is because documents were released. The reason we know about the botched redactions is because citizens looked at them. The reason survivors can publicly call out the DOJ for violating the law is because there's now a paper trail. This is how accountability works in a broken system, not through dramatic courtroom moments, but through slowly building an undeniable record of failure and cover-up. So where does this go from here? Let me lay out the scenarios. Scenario 1. De-escalation. The DOJ releases the remaining million documents over the next few months. They're heavily redacted but technically comply with the law. Congress holds some hearings where administration officials show up and say they're doing their best to protect victims. Survivors testify, but nothing changes. The media moves on to the next scandal. In 6 months, nobody's talking about this anymore except dedicated activists and researchers. This is the most likely scenario. Scenario 2. Escalation through legal pressure. The 12 senators who wrote to the Inspector General demanding an audit actually follow through. The IG finds that the DOJ violated the Transparency Act. Congress holds the Attorney General in contempt. There are lawsuits from survivors. The House Democratic Oversight Committee, which has been more aggressive on this than anyone, keeps pushing. This creates sustained political pressure that forces more releases, more investigations, more transparency. This scenario is possible but requires sustained congressional attention, which is hard to maintain. Scenario 3. Critical mass. Something in the unreleased documents or in the documents people are still combing through is so damaging that it can't be ignored. Maybe it implicates someone currently in power in a way that's undeniable. Maybe it shows such clear evidence of institutional cover-up that even mainstream media can't look away. Maybe survivors organize a legal challenge that actually succeeds. This creates a tipping point where accountability becomes politically necessary. This is the least likely scenario, but it's not impossible. What I think actually happens is some combination of 1 and 2. We get more document releases that don't tell us much new. There are congressional hearings that make officials uncomfortable but don't lead to charges. Survivors keep speaking out but don't get the full accountability they deserve. And slowly, over years, the historical record gets filled in enough that future researchers can piece together what happened and how it was protected. That's not satisfying, but it's realistic. And sometimes realistic is all we get. Let me zoom out for a second and talk about what this really means. The Epstein case isn't actually about Epstein. I mean, it is. He was a monster who hurt people and he deserved to rot in prison. But the reason this case matters, the reason it stays in the public consciousness, is because it's a perfect test case for whether our institutions can hold powerful people accountable. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy, connected man who committed heinous crimes in plain sight for decades. He had relationships with presidents, senators, CEOs, scientists, celebrities. He funded academic research. He donated to political campaigns. He traveled in the highest circles of American power. And during all of that, he was trafficking teenage girls. And the system protected him. Not because of some vast conspiracy, but because that's what the system does. Wealthy people get better lawyers. Connected people get favorable deals. People with powerful friends don't get investigated as aggressively. It's not a secret cabal. It's just how institutional power works. What the Epstein Files show us is every mechanism through which that protection operated. The FBI complaint that went nowhere. The sweetheart deal that granted immunity to co-conspirators. The death in custody under suspicious circumstances. And now, the document release that's technically transparent but functionally opaque. At each point, if you squint, you can see the institutional logic. Protecting sources and methods. Protecting victim privacy. Following procedural guidelines. But when you step back and look at the pattern, what you see is power protecting itself. And here's why that matters beyond just this one case. Because this is how it works for everything. This is how it works when police departments investigate their own officers. This is how it works when Congress investigates itself. This is how it works when the executive branch declassifies documents about its own misconduct. Institutions don't willingly expose their own failures. They protect themselves. Always. The only counterweight to that institutional self-protection is public pressure. Citizen oversight. Journalism. Activists who won't let the story die. Survivors who keep speaking out, even when it would be easier to stay silent. That's it. That's the only check on institutional power. And that's why moments like this matter, even when they're frustrating. Because every time citizens look at these documents and point out the failures, every time survivors speak out publicly, every time Congress is forced to hold a hearing, that's a small crack in the institutional wall of protection. Will it lead to criminal accountability in this case? Probably not. But it creates a record. It establishes a precedent. It makes the next cover-up harder. And over time, those accumulated small cracks can lead to structural change. This story isn't over. The DOJ says they have more than 1 million additional documents to release. Survivors are continuing to organize and speak out. Congress is investigating the botched release, and regular citizens are still combing through the documents that have been released, finding more failures, more inconsistencies, more evidence of institutional protection. I'm going to keep covering this. When the next batch of documents drops, when the Inspector General releases findings, when survivors testify at congressional hearings, I'll break it down for you. Because this is the kind of story that matters more than cable news thinks it does. This is about whether our institutions can be trusted to investigate themselves. And the answer increasingly seems to be no. If you want to stay updated on this story and others like it, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you actually see the videos when they come out, because YouTube's algorithm has been suppressing this kind of content. And look, I know this is heavy. I know it's frustrating. I know it feels like nothing ever changes. But the alternative to staying informed and engaged is letting them get away with it without any public scrutiny at all. So we keep watching. We keep asking questions. We keep demanding accountability, even when accountability seems impossible. Because the thing about institutional power is that it relies on you getting tired. It relies on you looking away. It relies on you deciding it's not worth the effort to stay informed. And the moment you do that, they win by default. So don't look away. This story isn't over, and neither is the fight for accountability. I'll see you in the next one.